Thanks, Fred.
You guys got the questions I sent you ready? Is it hard being in this space?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Lamar, and I'm from Northern Shores Services, which is a data destruction company around the Akron-Cleveland area in Ohio. And I'm also CFO of Dynamic Metal Services, a non-ferrous metal processor located in Cleveland, Ohio as well. First of all, I want to thank everyone who came to the reception last night that was sponsored by ISRI. A number of us here are active volunteer members and staff of ISRI, and we appreciate you guys coming. And it was an honor for us to sponsor the event last night. As I said, my name's Kevin Lamar, and I've mentioned the companies I'm associated with. I also chair the Recycling Education and Research Foundation, and I also am vice chair of the Electronics Division for the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, which is ISRI. We're joined here with our panel, and the session today is May the Force Be With You, a little take from Star Wars, and we're going to talk about the external forces impacting the ITAD industry and businesses. Before I introduce the panel, I just wanted to frame our discussion today. We're going to try to keep it at some top level so we don't, as they say, get lost in the weeds, but we really want to talk about some of the compelling government regulation, legislative issues, as well as some compliance and standards and operational challenges that we all face. Before we get started, you know, a while back, and we've all read it, Stephen Covey had a book out, and he made this one statement years ago that stick with me today, and it's, workers do it, managers manage it, but leaders determine what it is. And I think that's what we're doing here today. It's important that all of us try to mitigate risk. We do it every day. I do it in my business. And while we're mitigating risk, at the same time, we're looking for opportunities. And as you hear some of our subject matter experts here, all four of them friends of mine as well as very talented business leaders, it's interesting to see what issues are out there in the industry and how we can turn that around and turn that into an opportunity. And I think you'll hear that, you know, ring through in the discussions. So first off, I'd like to introduce we have Fred Fisher. He is Assistant Vice President of International Trade from the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. Fred, if you could just comment a little bit on your background.
Thank you. Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I joined ISRI about 5 months ago. I spent most of my career in government, 25 years working on trade policy, trade negotiations. So I bring a little bit of a new outside perspective, but it's just a very fascinating industry. As you know, there, and we'll discuss later, international agreements and global regulations as well as national regulations around the world. So happy to discuss all that with you guys.
Great. Thank you, Fred. Reich?
Hey, I'm Reich Sandlin. My consulting firm is River Vista Partners. I've been around this industry for a really long time, as you can see by the gray hairs, and I've kind of done it all. And so working with various ITAD companies, owning companies, and helping them grow. So that's what I'm doing now. My consulting business is really just sharing that experience with other people, helping solve their problems and grow. And along the way, I've also been very active in certification and standards development with the R2 TAC, with Rios, and been involved in the ISRI as well. So it's exciting to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Thanks, Reich. Craig?
Yeah, I'm Craig Boswell, Hobby International. I'm president of the company. For you that are younger than Reich and I, the gray hairs are coming if you stick here. Go find something else to do if you don't want gray hair, because it'll come. I was past chair of ISRI's Electronics Division. Adam graciously kicked me to the curb a few months ago. No, thankfully took over for me. Just want to put a little pitch in for the subjects that we're talking about today. I think you'll find these subjects very relevant to your companies. I would encourage you, this is only an hour-long presentation, so you're only going to learn so much in an hour, right? We'll give you as much as we can. But I would encourage you to be involved in the industry. These subject matters are important to our industry. My 2 years as chair of the electronics division, we spent many an hour talking about these key issues. And if you are a business leader in this space, it is incumbent on you to be abreast of these issues. It's the old thing about, if a truck's going to hit you, one option is to turn around and then it's just over quick. That's probably not a good idea if you're a business leader, is to let it hit you from behind. And so we're going to try to help you not get hit from behind today.
Great. Thank you. Mark?
My name's Mark Weintraub. I'm General Counsel at Reserve Management Group, and that includes Regency Technologies. And I have a little bit of a different background than the other folks up here. I grew up in the scrap business. Started in the ferrous business, and then I worked in a brass and bronze foundry for 10 years and went to law school at night. Practiced law for a while and then came back to the industry to sort of tie it all together. So I have a little bit of a different perspective. You could say I was fourth generation in the scrap business. Segue from what Craig said, there are a number of very serious issues facing the industry, especially the recycling portion of the industry. And if we don't stand up and speak out, we're going to get bowled over by that truck that Craig's talking about. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Each of the panelists have a few subjects that they wanted to bring to everyone's attention and for their benefit. And after that, we're hoping for some questions and answers afterwards too. So, and we have some prepared questions in case we have none. So we're looking forward to the session. Mark, if we could start with you, one of the things I was going to ask you to comment on is the fundamental misunderstanding, I think, as we label it, regarding our industry and the legislative process.
Well, I should also mention I'm the current chair of the Government Relations Committee for ISRI. And my experience, having been very involved with the administration, staffs at congressional offices and senatorial offices over the last several years, is simply that there is a fundamental misunderstanding about recycling in general. The vast majority of people, not just in the general population, but staffing at state, municipal, and federal legislative offices, just think of recycling as the stuff you put in your bucket at the end of the driveway. And that represents roughly 20%. This business and the other aspects of it really represent the vast majority of it. And the misunderstanding is that we're perceived as handling waste and not recycling. 70% of the steel manufactured in the United States is made from scrap metal. They just don't understand that. And when we explain what happens to, an automobile, an appliance, a computer, whatever gets recycled, they're amazed to understand that that takes place, because most of the perception is a MRF, where things are being separated. Now, I'm not diminishing the importance of that. That's important, okay? And it affects people in their daily lives when they put that stuff in the bucket. But when they're legislating and enacting laws that regulate our business from different perspectives, and they have this fundamental misunderstanding, then while there may be a noble purpose to what legislation is supposed to represent, the practical application of it is very, very onerous on the business, and oftentimes targeting the business. In New Jersey right now, there's a law where they're calling it an environmental justice law, and basically they've named recyclers as environmental stressors, right there specifically as defined as causing environmental stress. So what do you do with the recyclables in New Jersey if you don't have recyclers. One of the biggest issues stemming from this misunderstanding is the creation of legislation in different states, different municipalities that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you have a state, New Jersey, passing a law. You have Delaware passing something different. You have EPR legislation going on in different states. So if you're doing business that crosses state lines, so now you have to become a subject matter expert in your own state's laws, and then where you're doing business because of the different aspects. Again, while there's a noble purpose behind the environmental justice movement, thus far, it's been my experience that in discussing environmental justice issues, when it comes up in these legislative discussions and these groups that are advocating, they fail to include the businesses in the area that are impacted, along with employees, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, policy is decent, well-minded, noble. In practice, it's impacting our businesses negatively. And if we don't show up and speak up and explain and educate legislators and administrative officials about what we do and the positive impact we have, then we're going to get run over by that truck that Craig mentioned. And I think it's critical that this happen at a grassroots level, whether you reach out to your congressman, your state reps, whatever.
It's a good point, yes.
Can I add something to that?
Sure, Craig.
I think a lot of us out here are ITADs, and you may be saying to yourself, well, gosh, my facility looks like a computer store. It doesn't look like a recycling facility. And, maybe that wouldn't happen to me. I can tell you, if you get laptops in and you get one by chance that has a swollen battery and that battery catches on fire and the fire department responds, the next thing you know, you got the city coming in and saying, wow, we didn't know you guys were doing this dangerous electronics recycling in your facility. We really don't want that kind of activity in our city. We think it's dangerous and you're near a residential area, and these are, we know batteries are hazardous waste. They don't know what, they got a battery sitting on their desk every day and all of a sudden battery's hazardous waste, right? But that's the kind of response you can have. And what Mark is saying very appropriately is if you've been proactive, and let's say you've already had the fire department in, and you've shown them your facility and they say, wow, this looks like a computer, plant. I mean, it's a bunch of computers. Or you've already had your congressperson in and they say, this is great. Look at what you do. If that congressperson is in and you tell them how important electronics recycling is to the environment, they're on your side at that point. And that can make all the difference in the world. And what we need to do, as Mark pointed out, is be proactive in those areas.
Those are great. Go ahead, Fred.
If I could just add something as well to Mark's point on the politics. We're all familiar with perception is reality, that phrase, but in politics, perception really is reality. One anecdote is reality. So I think spending the time to inform, educate, teach what the story is of this industry, the positive things that this industry is doing, recycling, et cetera, I think is incredibly important and it should not be taken for granted. So when you have an opportunity, just don't assume people understand and do it in a way that can connect with them. And I think it really has a powerful impact, but it really can make a difference.
No, those are great points. I know in our operation, we purposely schedule at a minimum once a year for our local council person to come in from city council, as well as the fire chief and the police chief or their designated representatives, because you never know when an issue comes up where you need those people in support of your efforts. So it's something to keep in mind. It's not easy to orchestrate. Obviously, when they come in, you need to have a clean shop. up and make sure that you're following the rules. So I'm not ignorant to that, but it does pay some dividends if there's a fire, if there's a disgruntled worker that leaves your plant and files a claim. Those things all come up.
I want to add something to that notion of leadership in the industry and so forth. The perception concept. A fire at a facility is great news. A lot of color, a lot of flashing lights, all kinds of fodder for the cameras. That perception then defines what the rest of the industry looks like. And you need to be in front of that and prevent that. And be a leader in your community. Be a leader in educating, and it's not just legislators, educating people about what you do, whether it's, students at a local university or a high school. It's a fascinating process, what we do, and we should be proud of it. And for every component that either we're recycling or repairing, refurbishing, and reselling, it's keeping something out of a landfill. And it's serving a good purpose.
Thank you. Reich, I'd like to move over to you. Switching gears here, if you could add some comments regarding certification standards. I'm going to throw in COVID, health and safety in there too. That's a lot, but if you could.
Yeah. Let's keep it short, right?
Yeah.
So, certifications, we've seen how that's transformed the industry over the past 10, 15 years has really made a big impact. So a lot of us in this room are, have operated as certified facilities and understand how challenging some of that is, but also the benefits from a business development standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. I had the privilege of serving as co-chair of the R2 TAC for a number of years as they developed the 2013 version and the R2 V3 version. And it's a fascinating process. Let me tell you that this multi-stakeholder group working together to try to craft the requirements of a standard. Multi-stakeholder means that not everybody sees it the same way. And so one of the things that ISRI did, and some of the people in the room here really tried to represent the ITAD sector in those discussions and make sure that the language of the standard, the requirements, the auditing methods, and everything else reflected reality, reflected something that had some rational thought behind it. What we saw come out of that process with R2V3 is not perfect, but it is definitely a big step forward in terms of really making sure that the standard has integrity. The audit process has integrity and is consistent from audit to audit and different areas of the industry. We've seen improvements in data security and those requirements. We've seen improvements in health and safety requirements, although there's some real challenges there if you're doing any sort of destructive activities. So take a close look at those requirements as you're preparing for your audit. And that also flows downstream, so pay attention to that. So we're seeing these external factors being certifications and standards that are forcing us to react, to do some different things. Like we talked about a few minutes ago, being proactive in that. The R2 standard and other standards are living documents. They're living, breathing things, and we see SERI and the R2 Technical Advisory Committee really working. They're already working on planning for the next revisions to the standard and formal interpretations to the standard. So that input to that process continues. So I want to encourage you, reach out to SERI directly, come to ISRI and work through them. We're already working on some lists of improvements or challenges with the standard that we can try to improve it going forward. COVID.
Yes.
Well, we all saw none of us saw that coming, but we all had it impact our businesses. What was really interesting to me, there's so much disinformation. There's so much confusion about what how businesses need to react and respond to this pandemic. Back in 2019, 2020, and even today, there's still a lot of what do we require masks again? Do we not? What's our policy on vaccinations? What's our policy on quarantine if somebody comes to work that exposes the other employee? What do we do, right? And so it was interesting seeing a lot of colleagues come together on weekly calls for a while where we talked about this. We said, hey, in New York we're facing this perception or these state rules. In Texas we're facing these other state rules, and how do we reconcile that? What do we do to protect our employees? That's number one, right? We got to protect our employees. We've got to do the right thing by them, but we also have to keep running this business. We can't just completely shut down for months. So how do we make that happen? Do we bring nurses in to help with vaccination education? What do we do to facilitate that? So. Seeing the ISRI organization really collaborate on that and just compare notes and help stand shoulder to shoulder with each other was really good as we went through that process, and it continues. That's a good challenge. Good challenge to bring us together.
Yeah. Those are good comments, Reich. Thank you. Hey, just to follow up on that and share a personal experience. Back in 2015 as CFO, we were involved with nickel products, and when I first started in the industry, nickel was trading at $7.75 a pound. And in 2015, it dropped down to $3.75 a pound. That playbook that we created as that commodity price dropped and what we did in the income statement in order to keep our bankers happy, keep our employees in place, we documented that within our company because in our mind, we're going to see this again, and the strategies we came up with, we're going to implement those again in the future just because of the way commodity prices are. Similar to what Reich brought up about COVID, some of the proactive things you've done as business leaders to weather that storm, because you're here today and we're still dealing with the aftermaths. You want to keep good notes because you're going to refer to those notes in the future, whether it's a different, God forbid, a different pandemic, but some world disaster that we'll have to confront and keep our businesses alive. So good points, Rick. Fred, I'd like to move over to you. If you could, if possible, have a brief conversation on Basel and your recent developments in attendance to the meetings abroad. So,
Sure, thank you very much. So, for those who aren't familiar, there's an international agreement that covers transshipments or international shipments of hazardous and non-hazardous wastes. And that process, that's the Basel Convention. And they recently, it's about 30 years, the agreement has been in effect. There's, I think, now 188 countries, which is most of the world, but the United States is not a party. So there are reasons for it back 30 years ago, and there are reasons today why we're concerned and we're outside of the process. But the United States is still part of the process, but they don't have a vote. So in 2019, plastics, for the most part, most plastics were added to the agreement as controlled wastes. And when something is controlled, it has to be, there's a pre-informed consent process. So anytime this material is shipped anywhere in the world, there has to be an agreement with the receiving the importing country and all the transit countries ahead of time that they're capable of accepting this and responsibly managing that material once they receive it. So it's a complex process. It adds costs, it adds time. But it does add a layer of a bit of control, and I think that's the idea. So that was in 2019. They added plastics as well, and then it came into effect last year, 2021. This year in June, they voted to include e-waste, electronics, electrical components. That would take effect in January 1, 2025. So we still have 2.5 years before that would come into effect. And there's still a lot of work to be done. So it doesn't mean that all electronics, but it will be that most electronics will have to be managed in some way. But the details on whether it's certain products like certain circuit boards or all circuit boards, the definition of repair and reuse is still under discussion, what this pre-informed consent, this PIC process is going to look like in any reforms. So that's been discussed. So it's just a heads up, really, this is coming. It's now official that it's been voted on, but a lot of work still needs to be done. It's where I think the industry itself, associations like ISRI, and others can play an important role here in making sure that they understand the important role that recycling and others do in responsibly managing these materials.
Oh, great. No, thank you. Anything else, Fred, you'd like to add regarding that?
Yeah, just one item. And I think this is to the point of that I think Mark was raising as well, as, the world discusses these materials as wastes, right? Scrap is not waste. There's real value here. And literally the agreement, it just refers to waste, electronics, e-waste. And countries that are part of Basel, they incorporate that language into their national laws. So it's a perception. It's more than just perception. It's a real challenge. So when you're talking with anywhere around the world, you have to start from really a negative perception and try to turn it into a positive. I think there's agreement that if bad actors, I think that's the real purpose, is to try to eliminate the bad actors, but there are also a lot of good here, and that needs to be highlighted. So just from the idea that the world calls this waste, and it's really not waste, and it's a real challenge.
Good. No, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Craig, we have a number of legislative issues on the table, and I call them issues because they seem to change and present challenges. If you could add some thoughts on the Competes Act, the right to repair.
Yeah, so kind of like Basel, if you look at the Competes Act, the devil's in the details. To go back to Basel, one of the details that you heard was that the U.S. is not a party to the convention. Oh, that's a bummer, right? We're not a party to the convention. Well, what that means is if the commodities you're selling are considered waste, it is actually illegal to ship those out of the U.S. So, for instance, whoever the grand poobah of the technical guidelines ends up being, and we have an influence on that, decides that, hey, if an iPhone 13 has a cracked screen, well, that doesn't work. It's got a cracked screen, right? That's not good, even though it's perfectly functional. And that now becomes waste. Well, that means that the only place as a U.S. company you would be able to sell that legally is in the U.S. or another OECD country. So if right now you sell those to Dubai, that would become illegal trade, and you would not be able to sell those devices to that country. Similar with the Competes Act, we all want to stop what we feel are bad players, that they're loading what is definitely scrap electronics and they're dumping it somewhere. We want to stop that behavior. But if you look at that legislation, it said that working electronics would be exempted. And that's what it said, and that's great. I want my working electronics to be exempted. It should be. It's very important for bridging the digital divide and the U.S. participating in international markets that we're able to trade working electronics. What it doesn't do is define what a working electronic is. And in a legislative situation, the people that are defining that are not always the most educated people on defining what a working electronics is. In fact, I've seen it proposed many a time to default to, well, just have them test it to the manufacturing specification, because then we know it's working, right? If you've ever read a manufacturing spec on, say, like a cell phone, you know that would involve like 7 different levels of RF testing with a $300,000 RF testing system. And that would be how you define a working electronic. And so it is very important that we both be aware of these things and participating in these things. I could go to everybody in this room, and you could probably give a legislature a pretty good idea of what is legitimate trade and what is illegitimate trade, which should be considered working and which should not be considered working. But after that law is in place and those rules are established, is the wrong time to be concerned about it. The truck's always ran you over, it's down the road, it's made a left turn and ran somebody else over by that point, right? So, you know, just like with R2, you know, I would encourage you all to come up and shake Reich's hand, shake Adam's hand, Billy's hand, Mark's hand, because the standard we have compared to the standard that was initially released is a usable and functional standard. I can tell you the first time we read the first draft, I didn't sleep for 3 nights because I'm like, there's no way I can pass this. But we got involved. They came up with dozens and dozens of comments, most of which were incorporated in the standard because we all do it every day, and you know, it's a multi-stakeholder group, and the recyclers on the TAC only had so much of a voice, but they do treat comments very seriously, and they incorporated many of those comments. And now we have a standard that a lot of us in the room have been approved to. And I am not sure, we just got approved. I'm not sure we could have got approved to the standard as it was initially released. So, you know, again, we have to be proactive. We are the experts. We know what's working. We know what's not working. We know the people that are doing things that we would like to see stop because it hurts us. But if we don't participate, it's going to happen without us, and somebody at the EPA is going to say, working. Yeah, that's working, that's not working. Well, that's the regulation, and that is now in place, and it becomes illegal tomorrow to trade a cracked iPhone to a buyer that wants to buy it in Colombia or Dubai or any non-OECD country. And that would seriously affect our competitiveness as U.S. companies. If you look at right to repair would benefit the industry. If you get intimate with this issue, you'll notice that a lot of the opposition is to the non-commercial aspects of right to repair. Now, if you're at this conference, you're probably a commercial entity, right? So you want to repair phones, tablets, computers, you want to change the software on a Cisco device as a commercial entity. And there is momentum out there for commercial relationships that will allow those activities to happen. Unfortunately, that is getting muddled with being able to let a 12-year-old replace his battery on his kitchen table, which if I was Apple, I would be horrified with, because I have very well-trained professional people, and we don't have fires, we have thermal events, but we have thermal events on a fairly regular basis, way more than we would like. But my people are trained. They know to keep their workspace clear of combustible material. They know how to react it. Don't grab it with your hand. It's burning very, very hot. If you can get it on a floor where it can just burn out. And it's not a big, well, it's a big deal, but it is not a catastrophe. If for Apple, if somebody 12-year-old replaces the battery on the phone at the kitchen table and they burn down their house, that's a catastrophe, because somebody's going to sue Apple. Somebody's going to sue Apple. And that is going to be a barrier to right to repair. By the way, I think rightly so. As a commercial entity, Apple or Samsung, I think they should be concerned with that, because I can tell you Apple and Samsung is having fires when they repair phones too. It's impossible for that not to happen, no matter how well you train your operators. It's almost impossible to prevent it from happening. And they don't want to be involved in that liability. And what we're doing here is we're creating an issue that is getting so much opposition that there's very little chance of it moving forward at a broader scale as fast as we would like. However, I think there is momentum for commercial relationships where we are provided access to parts, because they also don't want us using gray market parts. They would like us to use OEM parts. So there is risk in using a non-OEM battery. If the BMS system of that battery is not sufficient, it could cause a fire. That induces risk again. And this is another area where, as an industry, we have a chance to kind of shape the future, or we can let the future just hit us.
Oh, great points. Good, thank you. Reich, we're going to move over to you. Just a quick question here. Based on your experience in the industry, what innovations are you seeing in ITAD operations, and what are the benefits that you see coming out of those innovations?
Great question. And I have the opportunity to work with a lot of different ITAD facilities and kind of see best practices and work with them on problem solving. So that's some of what we do every day. And what we've seen in the past couple of years and see going forward is some automation. With the ERP systems, with the data erasure and testing software. So we're seeing a lot of integrations going on and automation of some of those processes, which is really good. Of course, the R2v3 standard requires that you have a record of that, so that integration is a positive thing there too. But we are seeing some innovation around that. We're seeing some innovation around the repair processes, refurbishment processes, whether it's skinning or etching or what have you of cases. I've seen paint booths being used. There's a lot going on to make the grade of a product better than it was before. So, which improves reuse. That's not a bad thing. And we're also seeing more transparency operationally around grading. The REC, or REC, R2 categorization of items. I think in parallel with kind of the traditional A, B, C, D grades is a very positive move to be more transparent about what the buyer's getting. And so having that integrated into the software, integrated into the process, we're seeing advances in that. And I think we're going to continue to see improvements going forward on that area.
Oh, good points. Mark, if I could jump over to you, I hear the term first sale doctrine a lot, and this is really a disservice to you because you're a wealth of information. You could probably talk for 45 minutes on this issue, but if you could enlighten us for a couple minutes, that would be fantastic.
The first sale doctrine is basically what you might call an exemption to the Lanham Act, which protects copyrights and patents and so forth. And that means that after, an item is sold, okay, then no longer can the copyright holder, sue you for reselling that item if you choose. That said, we talked about advancements, and we talk about getting ahead of legislation. The law that governs it hasn't gotten into the digital age yet. So there's a lot that the manufacturers have been able to do a lot of workarounds and create defenses that prevent certain categorizations. And let me just say that it's very in the weeds, and I'm trying to stay high level. In fact, we're going to have ISRI's going to have an open call next week for the electronics division where non-members can join, and we're going to discuss it in a little more detail along with some Basel implications and so forth. So basically, if you get an item and you buy it and it's brand new, and you go to sell it, say, on an e-com platform, and you're advertising it as brand new, maybe it's an Apple product, okay? Apple can come after you and say, you can't sell that. It's not, even though it's brand new, the bar to get over for Apple is, will that item that you're selling confuse the consumer? So that's a low bar because Apple can say, well, if you're not an authorized reseller, then the warranty is not effective. So that would confuse a consumer who's buying that product supposedly as new, and in their mind, they think it comes with a warranty. Well, when they find out it doesn't come with the factory authorized warranty, such that Apple states it won't, your first sale doctrine exception goes down the tubes. That's the simplest example I can give. There are also some other more intuitive, complex issues, but it's that simple. And what the e-com platforms are doing, specifically even Amazon, is stating that you can't advertise something as new if it doesn't come with that factory warranty. Now, does that prevent people from doing that? No. Does it prevent people from selling? No. But there's been a nice little cottage industry created by law firms, and I'm a self-hating lawyer, so I can say this, but there's been a nice little cottage industry created where, there are algorithms out there watching this stuff, generating cease and desist letters. So are they going to, come after you for a $15 Otter cell phone case? Probably not. But if they want to make you a test case, they can. So it's a cautionary thing. And again, 45 minutes would just be the introduction to the Lanham, let alone the first sale doctrine. But it's very complex, and it affects us every day.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Mark. Craig, I had a question for you, and I know I've been involved in ISRI for just a little under 10 years now, and one of the reasons I'm involved is I just don't have the time to research a number of these issues while trying to maximize profitability. And, how do you get this wealth of knowledge in this association of business leaders all in one action? And I think ISRI is a good example of keeping you current. I've followed you, Craig, for a number of years in your business, and I can only imagine that if you could add some comments on how ISRI helps you with your day-to-day operations. So.
Yeah, certainly. When we talked about this, I think Adam mentioned this yesterday about the collaboration in this industry. And the ISRI Electronics Division is just an excellent example of that. These issues that we're talking about, Fred was in Geneva at those Basel meetings. Look, I'm sitting in Dallas, Texas. Geneva's literally 1,000 miles away. And, I don't know anybody besides Fred and Jim Puckett maybe, that were at the Basel meetings. But it could potentially affect the future of my business because those trade channels are important to my business. And before I was a member of ISRI, I would read it in the paper. And I'd realize, man, I'm really in big trouble here, and I didn't even know this was going on. Or the CARES Act, you read the splurb in the paper about the CARES Act, and you think, that doesn't sound so bad. And then you go to somebody like Billy at an ISRI meeting that's intimate with it, and you say, wait a second, I didn't even realize that's how it works. One of the fascinating things that I've done as a member of ISRI is go on the Hill, meet with staffers, with congressional staffers, and realize there's some 22-year-old congressional staffer that's thinking about this bill that is determining the future of my life. And it just opened my eyes to things that again, sitting in Dallas, Texas, I never knew about. And now every time we get an opportunity to get on the Hill and tell them about what we do and how important these decisions they're making are to real life businesses, I take those opportunities. And, I don't have that nightmare of opening up the paper and finding out, man, I'm in a lot of trouble here. They just passed this law, or internationally, they just changed trade rules, or in COVID, I never got more value out of ISRI than I did during COVID, because we would get together, and I was concerned about my employees, but I was also concerned about staying in business. And 20 of us, 30 of us on the call are in exactly the same spot. And Adam brings to the table, well, we're using this temperature checking mechanism, and we had a nurse, and they said it was fine. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. Before I was on that call, I could have been breaking a law for all I knew by checking a temperature. Was it a HIPAA requirement? Was it not a HIPAA requirement? ISRI was constantly putting out informational things on what we could do, what we couldn't do, were very important in getting it past that we were essential businesses, or we wouldn't have been open at all. We would have closed if we weren't deemed essential businesses. And, it's those types of things. I use this line a lot. I don't know who said it, but being an entrepreneur of a small company can be one of the loneliest places on earth, because you have a lot of responsibility and you typically don't have many people to turn to. And during that period, it would have felt, and I feel for you that didn't have that camaraderie, it was probably a very lonely period, because you were making very challenging decisions and, had whatever limited information was available to you.
Good. Thank you, Craig. Go ahead.
Add to Craig. So just to give you an example to ISRI, some of the new resources that are available. There's a new sustainability network which shares best practices among companies, which is quite valuable. There's a brands council working with brands for design for recycling, and working from the beginning to end of life issues with brands. We work on specifications that add transparency and more certainty when transiting these goods. We do certifications, assist there. So in ESG, environmental sustainability, and governance, this is an area that's affecting certainly public companies, and public companies will also be soliciting information from private companies up and down the supply chains. These are things we're talking about, extended producer responsibilities, and trying to shape any rules and regulations on there, and best practices. So there's a lot that we are working on to add value to, I think, and heads up and really help businesses.
Oh, great. Thank you, Fred. We have 7 or 8 minutes, maybe 10, for any questions from the group here. Okay. Well, one of our goals for this session was to not go deep into the weeds on these issues, but more so just bring some topics to your attention that maybe you want to track, maybe you want to keep an eye on, that could give you some headwinds in the future. What I found in our business experiences are that once a small bit of information starts to get traction, and especially if it's in the retail consumer end, it's not too far along where it starts to reach its tentacles into the business environment. And that's important to know how you're going to play that card when it comes down. And surrounding yourself with a good source of advisors. We all think of our accountants, our attorneys, our insurance agents. It's good to have some industry experts and some friends to bounce ideas off of. And, I know all of us up here and those from ISRI that are here at the event, are glad to help you through as much as we can, any of the challenges you're going through. So don't feel like you're by yourself. But, we have a question. Go ahead.
I had a question about EPR and its movement to Europe, whether that's going to happen anytime soon, and the second question I had was, people are getting serious about ESG tracking, and whether that constitutes an opportunity for us here or in Europe.
Great question, sir.
Yeah, I'll just take it just a very brief. So
Fred, if you could repeat the question.
I'm sorry. I think the question had to do with ESG requirements in Europe, whether we see, EPR, excuse me, coming, and I think you had a question about ESG, and yeah. So so all of these issues, they're they're percolating to the top of mind, and I think we're all going to have to be aware of these issues and be educated on these issues. As far as Europe goes, they're thinking about things just like we are, whether it's the Securities and Exchange Commission or others, what requirements would be on the ESG side. On EPR, I think we all see a lot of this coming. You just have to look, for example, at the automotive industry and what they're doing. Clearly, it's a relationship with a customer, and I think that's the way a lot of these companies are thinking about this, but it's certainly an issue that's rising to the top of people's minds.
Sure.
Yeah, let me jump in on ESG. ESG is absolutely an opportunity for ITADs right now. Get in front of that. Corporations across the world are being challenged, being tasked with producing their own ESG reports, monitoring and measuring that, reducing their carbon footprint, et cetera. And and ITAD is kind of in a unique position because of our focus on reuse. And our focus on data security. Data security and audit reporting is a key function of IT governance, all right? So there's your G in ESG. From a social perspective, we care about fair labor practices. We care about the fact that we can help bridge the digital divide. We're doing donation programs for our corporate clients. All of those are social metrics that we can measure and stay focused on. And then of course the E, environment. The reuse, the recycling aspects are huge in terms of waste diversion away from the waste stream, but also. Wow, the greenhouse gas side of that, the toxins reduction side of that, all of those are very powerful environmental statements that you can make. We talked yesterday, we had a panel on ESG, and we talked about telling your story. So you take those different components and you weave them together into your story, that you produce a report that your clients can recognize as part of their efforts, right? So they're challenged to make sure that their supply chain is aligned with their own goals. And so, the ESG is definitely up and coming. It's not a heavy requirement right now. We don't see a lot of clients asking ITADs for that information, but boy, is it coming. I'm just telling you, looking a year, 2 years down the road, if you can get in front of that right now, you can differentiate yourself.
I want to add something, just sort of circling back to the whole education thing. Part of our responsibility as an industry is educating on the difference between recycled content and recyclability. And there's a disconnect there as well, because you think that, oh, you get the package from Amazon and it's got recycled content, but it also has plastic attached to it, which destroys the recyclability. And it feeds into this whole narrative. And it's important for us to educate people on that so that they understand what role we play.
Fred, just 1 second. Go ahead, Adam.
I just had a quick question for Wright. Obviously, I agree ESG is critical to ITAD going forward, and everybody's thinking about it. Are there any governing bodies that you know of, or anybody out there that can help you calculate the carbon credits or offsets with relation to the units that you're taking in and selling?
Yeah, great question. The question was, are there any governing bodies or methods out there to calculate the carbon impact from reuse or recycling of electronics? The answer is yes. There's, I don't know, there's probably a dozen different calculators out there that are available. Some of those are pretty dated, like back to 2012, and that, so and we know how equipment has changed over time. So I think that's a good question. If you're just looking at calculating your own emissions, greenhouse gas from your own operations, the tailpipes, the power usage, and that kind of stuff, how does that impact greenhouse gases? Greenhouse Gas Protocol or GHGprotocol.org has some great tools to help you with that, but there's a lot of work involved in that, especially to make it credible. But specifically around electronics and how we can report on the benefits of that, EPA has some information out there. Green Electronics Council, and others. The WARM model that the EPA has some good tools. But again, a good bit of that is dated right now, so we're looking for opportunities to take a step forward in the industry.
So we should hire a real
Oh, you can hire me, absolutely, but I can't guarantee everything.
Thank you. All right, I think we're out of time right now. I want to thank everyone for attending and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thank you.